Hey, what's going on everybody? My name is StevieWunderKid and welcome back to another GTA 5 drifting video. So in this video, we're going to be finally going through and reviewing some of the drift cars that came with the brand new Bottom Dollar Bounties DLC. So we got a couple new drift tuning cars as well as getting a couple really good low grip drift cars. So today I'm going to be going through and reviewing 6 of these cars, going through some pros and some cons. So let's get right into it. All right, so first off, we're going to go through the drift tuning cars starting with the Ubermax Cypher. First of all, some pros about the Cypher. I'm going to be honest, there's not many. It's got decent power, I guess. It's not a lot. It's not super powerful, but it's not like severely underpowered, so you can drift with it. But moving into some cons, I think the Cypher probably feels the least natural as a drift car out of the new drift tuning cars that we've gotten, probably in general. It just feels really awkward. It's super sluggish, both in terms of power and handling response. In addition to that, the car tends to grip up and understeer quite easily. It kind of just like ends up plowing and understeering if you're trying to hold out longer drifts. So you really do need to be consistent with tapping the handbrakes or just basically holding down the brakes and kind of doing a rolling burnout just to keep this car sideways. Otherwise it will kind of upshift, it'll grip up, and it will fall out of power quite frequently. I honestly can't recommend buying the Cypher just to equip the drift tuning. It just doesn't feel how it should as a drift car in my opinion. I mean, I guess it's worth trying if you want to give it a go, but again, I wouldn't recommend it, and it's probably the worst of the 3 new drift tuning cars that we got. Next up, kind of improving things a little bit here, we've got the Ubermax Sentinel Classic wide body. Some pros about this car is that it is pretty peppy and quick, and it does inherently have pretty agile handling, so it's very easy to transition in drift and also initiate drifts. Some cons with the Sentinel Classic wide body though is that it can grip up and fall out of the drift quite easily because it is a pretty lightweight car, so momentum is not on your side and doesn't really help keep things smooth. So you do kind of with the Cypher, kind of the same deal. You do have to kind of work the car a little bit using the normal brakes and the handbrake to hold out those longer and faster drifts and just to keep the car sideways without gripping up. But honestly, I think it's a pretty fun car in general, and if you already have this car, I think it definitely is worth trying with the drift tuning because I actually consider it to be quite fun. Definitely not one of the best drift tuning cars that we have, but still a pretty fun time. And rounding out the new drift cars that we got on the launch day, we have the Volker Nebula Turbo. Some pros about this car. Honestly, I would say this probably feels the most natural of the 3 new cars that we got. It feels overall the best in my opinion. The Nebula Turbo with the drift tuning makes really good power and torque. Honestly feels surprisingly quick. It is super smooth and it's really easy to keep both in slow and fast drifts. It feels a lot less grippy and snappy than the other 2 Ubermax that we just covered. The car's not really fighting you if you want to keep it drifting. It feels a lot more natural and smooth in that regard. Some cons is that the handling with the Nebula Turbo isn't super responsive. The car has a bit of body roll and it is a bit on the heavier side, so in order to accomplish like quick corrections and transitions, you will need to rely on the handbrake a bit more, but nothing that takes away from the handling too much. Beyond that, as I said, it feels the most natural of the 3 new drift cars that we got. I'd say if you don't already have a Nebula Turbo, definitely go cop one and throw on the drift tuning because I'd say this thing is super fun to drive. It could be one of the best drift tuning cars that we have. I haven't really gone through and tested that yet, but I will be doing that in the future, and I'll also be evaluating the new Vorschlag Hammer that we're going to be getting as part of the drip feed, so definitely stay tuned for a more comprehensive video in the future that kind of goes through and ranks all of the drift tuning cars that we have. And moving into the really solid low grip drift cars that we have the options to choose from, first off, we've got the Annis Euros X32. I honestly think this was a big miss by Rockstar to add in like a Z32 300ZX to the game and not give it access to drift tuning. Just makes no sense to me. It would have been a really easy dunk from Rockstar to just give us drift tuning with this brand new car and spend even more money on it, but they decided not to and they gave it HSW instead. Honestly not sure why, but regardless, as a low grip drift car, the Euros X32 actually feels pretty solid. It's got good power with a decently strong mid-drive speed boost. It doesn't necessarily need the HSW upgrade, but it definitely does benefit a lot from having it equipped, especially if you're trying to drift with this car. That extra power does come in handy. Honestly, the chassis feels pretty solid for drifting in general. It holds good angle, it feels fairly balanced in terms of weight, it's easy to handle during a drift, and it doesn't really feel too under or oversteery. Generally a pretty neutral car, which is nice. Some cons about the Euros X32 is obviously it doesn't have drift tuning and it is very expensive with the HSW upgrade equipped, so kind of got to pick your poison there. If you're really passionate about this car and you want to try to drift it, maybe you can sink the money into it, but I can't recommend buying this car just to turn it into a drift car. Low grips would be fun to experiment with if you already have the car, but again, not worth you buying it just for drifting. In addition, some handling cons. The mid-drive speed boost with this car can be fairly inconsistent and hard to hit. Just because of the general lack of rear grip, it can be hard to get the wheels up to speed so that you can actually engage the boost reliably. So that's one little quirk that might be a little bit hard to navigate. Overall though, I think it's a solid low grip drift car. It's far from the best low grip drift cars in the game, but it's also really not that bad either. And next up, we have probably my favorite car out of this entire DLC just because of how unique styling wise it is, and it also makes for a great drift car, the Bolokin Envisage. This is again my favorite car we've gotten with this DLC, but also probably my favorite EV car in this this entire game. For drifting, the Envisage is surprisingly great at it. A lot of you guys might not know how easy the rear-wheel drive electric cars are to drift here in GTA Online. All you really need to do with these cars to drift them after you of course fully upgrade them and equip low grip tires is to essentially just floor the gas and consistently tap the handbrake to keep the rear tires sliding. So at lower speeds you're going to need to tap the handbrake less frequently, and then you're going to need to up that frequency during those higher speed drifts, but generally it's a pretty simple process. There's a bit of a learning curve involved with it, but you can get these EV cars sliding super simply. Now for the Envisage, it's a really good chassis for drifting in general. It could use a bit more torque and a little bit more steering angle, but you still have enough to work with to drift it properly. It's got fairly agile handling as well. It can be smooth both in drift but also responsive when you need it to be. As for some cons, again, there is a bit of a learning curve learning how to kind of finesse this car to drift with the EV powertrain. It will take a little bit of time to practice, and then handling wise, as I said, the car could use a bit more steering angle and power, but it's still really manageable, and with enough practice you can have a lot of fun with this thing. With enough practice you can get this car feeling pretty similar to some of the drift tuning cars with not a lot of work, so in my opinion I think it's definitely worth getting and playing around with low grips. It's just an absolute blast to drive. And last but definitely not least, we have another super unique and unexpected drift car, the Invitero Coquette D1. This car is absolutely beautiful, and I wasn't expecting to first of all get a car like this, but I also wasn't expecting it to drift as good as it does. The D1's got a ton of power with a pretty strong and consistent mid-drive speed boost. It's also got super balanced handling. It feels heavy enough to be smooth in a drift, but still light and easy enough to throw around through transitions and both slow and fast drifts. You can honestly throw anything at this and it will handle it just fine. It is easily one of the better low grip drift cars I've had the pleasure of trying out. Now when it comes to some cons, like we've saw with some of the other low grip drift cars, this car could use a little bit more steering angle, but honestly that's really about it. There's nothing else I could really complain about. This car was a super pleasant surprise to have as a good low grip drift car, so if you ever do want to experiment with yours and throw low grips on it, you will have an absolute blast doing so. So yeah boys, that is gonna wrap up my little review of all of the drift tuning cars and also some of the good low grip drift cars that we got out of this update. Of course you guys know I'm gonna keep you guys up to date with all of the new drift tuning cars that we get in the future with the Fudo and the Vorschlag Hammer, but beyond that I think that's about it for the drift cars we're gonna be getting out of this update. This update, originally I approached it with a bit more of a negative mindset. I've started to kind of soften up a little bit with this DLC, and I'm starting to enjoy it a little bit more now that I've had the time to explore the drift tuning cars, the non-drift tuning cars, the new liveries that we've got, and eventually I'll probably try out the Creator 2 and see what those features are like as well. So yeah, lots of both good and bad things to come out of this update, and really trying to see the positive sides of it. So hopefully you guys are too, and you're starting to enjoy the update at least a little bit more. But regardless, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and are appreciating all of the drifting content. I've got plenty more in the pipeline that I will be releasing soon, so stay tuned for that. But I'm going to leave the video there. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next one.